Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Karen Katchik, and I'll be moderating today for today's Life Sciences in Focus webinar on FDA Diversity Action Plans, deciphering the guidance and its consequences. So we're going to dive in with a short presentation to frame the topic and then move on to discussion. So before we dive into that presentation, let's meet our panelists, who you may know already, but I'll let them introduce themselves. Joan, you want to go first?
Well, thank you, Karen, and the entire Vistatec team, and for all the attendees today for this amazing opportunity. I'm Joan Chambers. I am a senior consultant with the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development. And as I said, I'm thrilled to be part of this panel with Karen, Lya, and Aman, and where I will share some objective insights about the FDA's diversity action plans today, particularly as it relates to investigative sites, patients, community engagement, as well as patient advocacy organizations. So thank you again, Karen.
Thank you very much. Aman?
Thanks so much, Karen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone that's attending. My name is Aman Khera, and I'm really honored to join you today for Worldwide Clinical Trials. I've got nearly 30 years of experience in the CRO space, and I am a VP of Regulatory Science and Innovation. And I've had the privilege of working closely with many different sponsors in many different countries at many stages in development. There's a lot of manys there in a variety of indications. And health equity has always been a personal passion of mine as well. And for many years, I've thought about this, but now I'm fortunate that I've been able to combine some of these passions together with regulatory science and health equity. And today, I'm truly excited to discuss the importance of these diversity action plans and how they can truly drive innovation in our space and ultimately lead to better outcomes in our industry for the patients that we truly care about as well. And I'm really looking forward to discuss this more and deep diving with my fellow esteemed panelists as well. So above all, thank you so very much for the opportunity for Vistatec to hold this crucial conversation. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Aman. And Lya?
Thank you, Karen. I'm beyond excited to be part of this panel. I'm very passionate about diversity, being myself a Latina woman, so working in science. I am a chemist at heart, and I currently work for Citeline, specifically for Citeline Clinical. So I work a lot with sponsors, trying to develop diversity action plans, mainly driven by gold standard data that has been in the market for 20 plus years. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for attending, and I cannot wait to start.
Well, fabulous. So let's turn it right over to you, Lya, and have you frame the discussion for us with a short presentation.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss one of the most crucial elements shaping the future of clinical trials, the requirement to submit a diversity action plan. Our panel today, as you all met, we are going to explore the draft guidance that was mandated under the FDORA back in 2022 and its implications for sponsors and stakeholders moving forward. I also want to take this opportunity to remind you all that is listening now or in the future self that you can still submit your comments online by no later than September 26. I encourage you to have your say and make a difference. Overall, today's discussion is about gaining a comprehensive understanding of how FDORA's mandate is shaping the future of clinical trials, how sponsors are preparing for this regulatory shift, and what actions are necessary to stay ahead of the curve. But before we start a conversation, let me go through a series of fortunate events for diversity. We all know that the topic of diversity is not new, and the FDA has released many other guidances in the past. So why there is so much pressure now? In April 2022, the FDA released a draft guidance with the purpose to provide recommendations to sponsors developing medical products on the approach to develop a race and ethnicity diversity plan to enroll a number of participants from underrepresented racial and ethnic populations in the US following the OMB standards. The pressure came once Biden signed that into law at the end of 2022. Under this law, sponsors will be required to submit diversity action plans for phase 3 or the pivotal studies. These provisions build upon the 2022 FDA draft guidance. However, the federal requirements take those plans a step beyond race and ethnicity to also include enrollment by age group, sex, and other non-demographic characteristics. As part of the law, FDA had to release or to run a public workshop that happened at the end of 2023. And FDA is also required to release the results of that public workshop to the public. This was also part of the federal requirements that they should release a guidance to help the sponsors understand what's required next. Everyone, I'm sure all of you here were expecting the guidance at the end of 2023. I know there are many of you that work in the regulatory side or always to see like what's going to happen. We know that this was delayed, but in the meantime, what FDA did, they released another draft guidance that was actually a guidance that was already final back in 2016 to help the sponsors understand how to collect race and ethnicity data in clinical trials. However, the guidance expressly does not address the diversity action plans required under FEDORA or the appropriate population for clinical trials. So here we are in June this year. Finally, the delayed guidance on diversity action is out, and that's the theme of our conversation today. And we all know that once the updated guidance is released, FDA has within 9 months after you have submitted your comments online to submit a final guidance. So again, a reminder to all of you to submit your comments by September 26 and have your say before the guidance comes out fine. We estimated like Q3 2025. And what does this mean for sponsors? That means that now any clinical studies of drugs with protocols submitted within 180 days following the publication of the final guidance, expected in Q3 2025, they must submit a diversity action plan. So I hope this brings us like to the setting the scene for today, and I'll pass over to Karen. Thank you.
Joan, Aman, would you like to respond to what you've heard already from Lya?
So Lya, wonderful presentation. It kind of is very insightful and gives a really high level overview of the entire plan of the FDA Diversity Action Plan. I think my one observation and one insight, we had the draft guidance that was issued in June 2024. And, now it's going to be a year later, pretty much, when the next final guidance comes out in Q3 2025. And to me, just from my perspective, how will that ultimately impact some of the initiatives, the programs, maybe the strategies that are already being put in place by sponsor organizations, CROs, niche providers, the sites, now knowing too that companies and professionals are putting in their comments right now, and if those comments are approved, and that is then translated into the guidance for 2025, it really makes me take pause to say, well, again, if they are approved, what impact will that actually have on ongoing patient enrollment, retention, the whole strategies, but even equally important, the relationships that have been built from June moving forward to 2025, that impact. So that's kind of just my observation. So Aman.
Thank you, Joan, so much for that. Following on from that, I'm going to go even backwards. So there were a lot of sponsor companies that did submit diversity action plans following the April 2022 guidance. And now everything is draft, and we were expecting, like Lya was alluding to as well when we were setting the stage, that we were hoping it was going to be final. But this June guidance, like, we're in a gray zone. I always call it the gray zone now when I'm speaking to people about this, because we have an updated, or rather a rewrite of the guidance, right? In addition, where it's not really for implementation as such, but it is because you can see the spirit as well. But then you also know that there's going to be further updates when the guidance is finally finalized as well. So, there's a lot of sponsor companies that have submitted and will continue to submit diversity action plans, because clinical research has not halted, right? It's ongoing. And even though that, we're going to get that switch flipped on about, okay, we have that, sponsor companies and CROs and the providers, we're already thinking about this, because it's not just about a diversity action plan. It's about how you actually interweave all those things that we're thinking about in terms of, the enrollment goals and updating the FDA and understanding if we're making a clinical trial, a particular clinical trial, work for the patients that it's supposed to be tested on and, investigated upon. So it's a large space as well. And I think everyone that's involved in diversity action plans, it's not so much, oh, we can do this, we can follow a playbook. It's very much, on a case-by-case basis. We've got sponsors that are submitted, sponsors that are now doing modifications. So that's the new term about, updating with those modification things. And what do we include when we're in that gray zone, right? As such, while we're in that. I don't know, Joan and Lya, what do you think as well?
Yeah. I love what you said, Aman, because FDA is also learning. I joined the 2 days workshop, and FDA relies a lot on their sponsors' communication back to the FDA. So that's why I encourage you to submit your comments, because they did implement most of what they learned for the workshop back in November 2023 on this guidance in June 2024. So if you want to see and make a difference, I'd really encourage you to submit those comments. And then, Aman, we talked in the past around, this is not a tick box exercise anymore. This is not, oh, now I have done it and that's it. This will be continuously happening. So this is a mindset shift, isn't it, Aman, in terms of understanding. This is not about copy and paste protocol, inclusion, exclusion criteria anymore. It's involved everyone. Sometimes I'm asked, okay, who are the people that are the key stakeholders, shall we say, involved? Is regulatory? Is the medical writers writing the inclusion, exclusion criteria? Is the regulatory team like pulling their hair out to understand, okay, try to keep up with what's going on. So it's a matter to all of us, involves patients, involves sites, involves sponsors, involves CROs like you, involves like data-driven company like Citeline, involves like a number of different people. And I think that's why there's such a buzz around that, the word diversity action plan.
Thank you. Tia, I knew this was going to be a great discussion. We're going to talk about OMB. So the question to the audience, whether you're familiar with the OMB's new definitions.
FDA, since when they released the April 2022 guidance, they mentioned about following the office management budget standards, which basically they have ethnic category, either Hispanic or Latino, and then there are 5 race categories. And this caused a lot of a stir. I also read like lots of the comments submitted to the FDA, like how difficult it is to standardize data, how difficult it is if I'm working on a global study to do the harmonization, how the OMB standards in the US are using versus someone that's based like in Europe, etc., and so on. So recently, in March this year, just to make things more complex for sponsors, they release a revised OMB standards. And here I'll just summarize one, like, of course, if you're not aware of that change, is what they are proposing, this new revision, is to combine the question for race and ethnicity in one question. So rather than have one question like, what's your ethnicity, what's your race, now would be best have this under one question, and then you can select your response, whether you are Hispanic or Latino, America, India, etc., and so on. And then there's a new category that will now be included, which what they call MENA, or the Middle Eastern or North African race categories. So within the, I can send you the link. Please feel free to text me like on LinkedIn if you want like any of those links and how to submit the comments online. If you want to see the OMB revision, I'll be happy to share that information with you. But what's happening is that they are expecting complete compliance within 18 months. And this should be bringing all data collections in programs into compliance with the updated standards within 5 years of that date that was signed. That was March 28. So there is, again, update your forms if you are collecting race and ethnicity data. Here at Citeline, we are working really hard to add these in our product roadmap to ensure that all the categories are aligned to the OMB standards, so they can help you like to get what you need for your diversity action plan. So that's what I had. And there's, I think, actually a good topic to discuss, isn't it, Aman, around the complexity of driving that data, not just race, ethnicity, but also looking at the social determinants of health. So how income, age, like your level of education, access to transportation, how this can inform your recruitment strategies, and then going back to translations, etc. Like what the sponsors need to be working now to ensure that they are fulfilling those requirements for the diversity action plan.
Absolutely, Lya, because I was thinking like when we're, as a regulator, when we're thinking about, okay, what do we need to include in the diversity action plan? And look, the US says one country. In many, when you're doing a global trial, it's one country, right? So one thing that I found really encouraging is that it's a bit subtle, right? But other agencies across the world are thinking about this. I think it was the EMA that termed the concept diversity by design, right? And with that, it was a case of, okay, we might not have a diversity action plan. And sometimes I'll say to my colleagues as well, they've heard me a few times, I wish this was called an inclusion action plan instead, right? Because what we're trying to do is to include the right demographics at the right time as well. And, you know, having to think about that, you know, it's more about, okay, you know, the US have got their I guess you could say quotas of what considers is a race and ethnicity. But when you talk to people in Europe, that's a completely different language, right? So how do you meld that together when you're doing a global trial? And that's what we get really busy with, you know, guiding sponsor companies to think about that, you know, how you are being inclusive, because sometimes, just like you said, Lya and Joan, I know we've discussed this as well about the different dimensions of diversity. How do you incorporate those into that diversity action plan, which can be shared with other regulatory agencies, or excerpts of it can be shared when you're having engagement with other regulatory agencies as well, because they're interested. They want to know what you're doing to get to the right people, the right patients and such as well. So it is a complicated topic. Like when you fall outside of the US, you have to think about data privacy, you know, the cultural aspects that you need to think about as well. So I guess there's one reason why this is such a huge space, right?
Yeah, and I'm passionate about data. And another thing to add is that at least here in Europe, you are not obliged to select anything. So you can, if you don't want to disclose what's your race, ethnicity. So sometimes it's quite hard because some categories might be unknown, which I prefer, which means like it's unknown. the patient didn't disclose that race category versus trying to have a category that's called order, because for me order doesn't mean anything. So there is a lot of the mindset shift in terms of how do we collect the data, how to harmonize this data to ensure that we are capturing the right race and ethnicity, as well as looking at the epidemiology of the disease, right? So we should be looking at that first. What's the incidence of the disease within that race ethnicity? And another thing that I'd like to add, we all talk about diversity, but I think our definition of diversity goes beyond race and ethnicity, isn't it, Joan and Aman? It goes way, so to be more is equity, as you mentioned. It's not about, Aman, like I want to have a seat at the table. I also want to be part of it. I also deserve to get the treatments that white male patients are getting. I want to be part of that. So that expands to the social determinants of health, it expands for people with disabilities, mental disabilities, people with comorbidities, also age groups, right? So like if you look at the age groups, like can we break that a little bit more rather than having like children in an age between 18 to 65? So I don't know what's your view on that as well in terms of the age.
Okay, I was thinking more so about how, Lya, you've expanded about how we need to think about the different dimensions of diversity, which, you know, a lot of people in the industry have always thought about, but now because it's mandated, I guess you could say, it's for sponsors to think about how to really think about the strategy, right? And interweave it accordingly when you're doing a clinical research program as such. It's not just and I say this, the diversity action plan is the beginning and kind of, so you start by declaring your interests, right? And what your plans to the FDA and maybe other regulatory agencies as well in different engagements. But then this needs to feed out to how do we operationalize this as well? And it's not just going to be with a diversity action plan as such. I always say the diversity action plan, then once you've got an initial one, right, then you're going back to make a revised version to report back to the FDA and let's say other agencies as well, what you thought you were going to do, what actually happened, and how you're going to move forward as well. And for me, I guess you could say as a regulator, the diversity action plan becomes a beautiful, succinct document within the IND, which tells a story of how this, I guess you could say, this product under investigation has been developed through the development journey and what tasks and initiatives the sponsor company and the CRO and other providers have been able to do to move the needle forward, because that's what agencies want to see, moving the needle forward. We can have the most lofty, ambitious goals, but now, and they could be woolly, I guess you could say, right? But now, because there's that mandate about, we want the report, we want you to, you know, have to make sure the data, at least with race and ethnicity, age, sex and gender, is now included in the IND annual reports. But that's not to say, remember, we're in that gray area, right, where the updated, finalized guidance might actually give more consideration to say, great, we talked about 4 different things, dimensions of diversity, and we offered to say, you know, social determinants of health, what are you doing in other aspects and things? Who's to say that after the comments come in next year, FDA might increase those different dimensions of diversity as well? That could happen. Those are my thoughts, I think.
Yep, there's no end to diversity, right, in this world of ours, right? And we all default to the most obvious ones, but there's a wealth of things we could go to.
I think, Aman, you hit on a couple of good points, but 2 words kind of came out, you know, how do we operationalize this? And then the strategies. And when sponsor companies submit their, you know, diversity action plans, you know, they're working with different stakeholders, but ultimately it brings it down to the research site area to be
That's
able.
where I was going next.
Oh, sorry,
Site
Karen,
burden.
sorry.
No, you're right. I was going to ask you exactly. That's where I was going. I was going to say, what effect do you think these plans are going to have on site burden and on patients? I was exactly going in the same way as you are. So please continue. Don't apologize.
Yeah, because I Aman, those were, as I said, two key words that really, resonated with myself, because again, we have all these wonderful plans, and then it funnels down to the investigative site and the site team to be able to just figure out, okay, how do we operationalize this? How do we implement, what are the strategies in place? And then ultimately, how is that going to impact the patients? And it's all key points, because again, it's all like this whole massive, in my opinion, whole massive plan. So when we look at the investigative sites, it's like, well, I kind of look at it in three different areas of increasing like the site operations. The sites now will be required to collect additional requirements on demographic information, to Lya's point and Aman's point, like really looking at the different communities, the different populations, and putting together specific strategies above and beyond what they're doing now, trying to bring patients in to inform, people about clinical trials and, help them with that mistrust factor, but then also making sure that the communication and your approach is culturally sensitive and relevant and representative. So there's a lot of, operations behind that, which may add complexity to the site infrastructure at the moment, may increase workload, and, it might also justify additional staff members being hired. But then also looking at the training and the resources, and we have various industry partners within the industry that sites can work with, whether it's through patient organizations, community leaders to build up those to build up the trust, translation organizations where you're now working with translation organizations to help with preparing the culturally sensitive material that's going to be well received or will help the patients' communities understand more about clinical trials. And then even, I think, Lya and Aman, you may have mentioned it, but also, the transportation providers. How do we provide transportation and accessibility to clinical trials if community members don't currently have that at the moment? So I think when you look at the site, there are certain opportunities, but it also adds a level of complexity, and not to say burden, but it may kind of verge on a little bit of burden. But again, ultimately, there's a positive at the end of the road here. I'm not sure, Lya and Aman, if you'd like to chime in.
Please.
I like the word burden. I listened once to someone say the burden is always going to exist. It's just going to change who is going to take that burden. Sometimes to be on the patient, and then sometimes it moves to the site, sometimes move to the sponsors, but the burden is always going to be there, unfortunately.
That's a really good point, Lya, because again, burden, I think we're all thinking about burden, how it's transferred from, okay, a sponsor company writes the best diversity action plan they can ever imagine, right? But if it's not done, right, thinking about how it's going to impact, whether it is, at the patient level, the investigator level, the site staff level, we're skipping a beat, right? We're skipping a huge beat, because if all that this diversity action plan mandate has done is just to push more pressure on sites, then we need to be even more smarter about what we're communicating. And there needs to be more hand-holding at the site level as well, so they're not just thrown, this is our enrollment goal, this is what's happening, you just need to do it. That's not going to work, because site staff are already overburdened, right? Way before this diversity mandate came out, right? As such as well. So I like what you said, Lya, and Joan, I know sites have always been top of mind as well, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm conscious of time. We could talk about the patients and the sites for another half hour, but let me take it to sponsors. So large sponsors, tiny sponsors. Anybody want to talk about two people and an idea in a biotech? Those kind of sponsors first, and then all the way up to the big ones. So how would you like to, what do you think, how are they responding? Right? We've talked a lot about what we think they ought to do. How are sponsors actually responding? Lya, do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, I can cover the large sponsors because I have quite of good relationships with the large sponsors. And as Aman mentioned before, majority of the large sponsors are already submitting diverse action plan. So there has been a project called Project Equity. And I can send you the link if anyone wants to know about that. And it was mainly for the oncology division. And there were a number of diverse action plans that were submitted to the FDA. They provide feedback, and then I think only 80, I think there was wasn't acceptable for the FDA in the end. So I can send you all this data. So the largest sponsors, what they are looking at the moment, they are building teams for diversity. So you're going to see now lots of new roles coming up. That is the head of diversity and inclusion. There is a head of diversity clinical trials. So there are a number of roles. They are actually building teams in order to tackle, shall we say, this upcoming final guidance. They are looking into census data. They are looking at real world data, and they are looking to harmonize this data in order to inform their strategy. And they are now going back to this study design. So that's what I'm saying. This is touch upon every single person. So it's for the one that's on the beginning, develop the inclusion exclusion criteria, the eligibility criteria, up to when the protocol gets landed to the cleanups, and then how I'm going to operationalize now this protocol, isn't it, Aman? And then the feasibility teams also need to find, is the site close to the patient? So there's a whole number of complexities that we need to look at. Plus, when moves to patient engagement, it moves to patient recruitment and retention. There is that point too, right? Which is a big challenge. So the sponsors, fortunately, they have shall we say, a budget to invest in terms of creating their teams in-house that they can try in and buy data or use CROs, outsource using CROs to help them develop the diverse action plan. So this is from a large sponsor view, but they don't have all the answers. So I usually get asked what's good enough look like? So because FDA doesn't say if you, I don't know, if you provide 85% of 100 that you should have enrolled, that's acceptable. So there's no definition for FDA what's acceptable. So there's always the question what I'm providing, is that good enough? And it's funnily enough, on this draft guidance, FDA was quite clear in terms of the number of pages to be submitted, a max of 10 pages. I guess they're not expecting a dissertation of 100 pages. You're justifying why you're not enrolling patients, which is quite interesting. So how do you combine the balance of providing a consumer user-friendly language? They also promoted transparency in terms of your website, how are you publishing those diverse action plans on your website to create that trust that's much needed. And also the balance with the accuracy of your data, to find the epidemiology of the disease. And okay, you can develop the best protocol, but if I cannot operationalize, if I cannot find patients, you're stuck. And then we all know that one single, I'm going to take this from you, Joan, the Tufts report, $40,000 of a daily cost, isn't it, for a delayed clinical trial? So time costs money. Yeah. So that's what's around from the large sponsors perspective.
Aman, can you speak to mid-size or small as well?
I can certainly speak to mid-size and small, and I know Joan will probably be able to expand as well. So look, there's many companies out there that are developing products, right, in different disease indications. They don't have the budget of a large sponsor company, right? So they might actually be like a virtual biotech or something. We're talking 7 people, right? They're not going to hire in a person to come in when they are contracting out a lot of the work, which is where the niche providers come in and the CROs come in as well, because what those kind of like organizations can do, like a CRO, for example, is if we're working with a variety of different sponsor companies from different, I guess you could say, sizes and budgets and things like that, we can also share, like, you know, the best practices that maybe a small, humble biotech, a virtual biotech who is struggling to understand what difference they can make, right? And we can share that, you know, approach to say, look, these are the quick wins that you can do to help move the needle forward, right? And there's going to be other things. They might not be able to hire a team of health equity experts, you know, but I've always said it would be great if this is all interwoven. Imagine if everyone in the clinical research space took it on themselves to actually think about my role. How can I move the needle forward as well? And what I'm doing, whether it is patient recruitment and retention, or feasibility, or the diversity action plan, or something like that, or if I'm talking to a site, a clinical trial liaison person, for example, or the CRA or something, what can I do to help move the needle forward? What can we actually do rather than saying, okay, we've hired a team in, we're now going to solve this? Those are the kind of questions and answers that the discussions that are happening at a virtual biotech level, I guess you could say. And yes, of course, you can hire in the experts and things, but it's not one person's role and responsibility to drive that all the time, right? We can kind of pinpoint and everything, you know, we can drive, you know, nudge things and everything, but then ultimately data wins as well. And we'll know if we're making a difference when we're thinking about how we record it back into the diversity action plan, I guess, as well. And that increasing, Lya, you made a really good point about increasing trust as well. That is something that we know is a big elephant in the room, right? But it's so complex, but let's keep on trying to make that difference, I guess. Joan, what are your thoughts as well?
I fully agree with you, Lya and Aman. I think too, when you look at, you know, the large pharma, they do have a lot of the budget dollars and the financial means to hire staff and, you know, and work with niche providers. When you look at the small to mid-size, Aman, as you mentioned, they don't have that luxury, lack of a better word, my apologies. But I kind of also go back to a panel that I ran earlier this year where there was a gentleman from a very small biotech where they were wearing multiple hats, you know, in medical affairs. And part of their strategy was, and it takes time, their strategy was, how do we build up our relationships and really work early, build, sustain with patient advocacy organizations based on where our pipeline is going to look. But it's more of not coming in with an ask or an agenda. It's more of like, we're here, we want to work with you, we want to build the relationship. And again, that takes time. But then also, as you're working and sustaining those relationships, you're also showing a commitment and an interest in their organization, even outside of a planned ask. And, you know, the gentleman said it's kind of a work in progress, but they are seeing a little bit of traction. And there's some organizations that are a little weary to say, okay, what's, you know, why are you coming to us and what's this relationship going to look like? But that takes time. And then over time, lack of a better word, there's hopefully a positive result at the very end. But I think it's just a combined effort across the board. And that also helps build trust. We know that certain community members are going to always have that, you know, hand up and push back. But I think that over time, that if we show that we're here and we're making a commitment, that hopefully that mistrust will start to kind of fade away. That's my thoughts.
Thank you all. So before we move to what the audience is asking, please do put your questions in, everyone who's here. Thank you. I see that they've started to come in. I have one question before we take. So what we do here at Vistatec often advances diversity by means of language access and cultural competency. How are regulators, anyone involved, sponsors, regulators, other service providers, encouraging or ensuring varied and diverse trial participants by those means? Is it part of the big picture that you've seen, or is there anything specific going on? Are you seeing increased efforts into language access? Is it featuring in US-based trials, for instance? Aman, maybe you can speak.
Sure, I can
to
start, then I'm going to
that.
ask
Yes.
Joan to pick up as well. So
Yeah.
it's always been, I guess you could say, when old school thinking has been that this is a protocol, right? If you can't speak English or you can't converse in English, you can't participate in a clinical trial, right? Very old school essentially. Okay, understand. Now it's a case of where FDA are even encouraging, other languages and translations and things. And I know that makes it difficult when you're submitting study documentation to ethics committees and not so much regulatory to the FDA, but to the IRBs and things like that this is going to be a language consideration and everything. But there are many different offerings as well now. So you can do translations on demand. You can get people. And this is where I kind of nerd out, I guess you could say, on the AI-driven components as well, that, there could be, if a trial participant is struggling to understand the study documentation, such as the ICF or something, you can have that translated at a drop of a hat nowadays, right? We understand that adds more cost and it could be more time as well, but how else are you going to be truly involving patients that English might not be the first language? And I think about that personally, because English is not my first language, Punjabi is, right? So I'm that hard and fast person that sits there going, okay, translate something for me, right? When vendors are coming in and they're saying, I'm testing them as well and seeing how quickly can you do this? Because that's what sponsors want to know. Oh, we don't want another delay, right? We don't want it because we need this trial up and running, but then we need to be thinking about how we're looking after the patients as well. So absolutely, languages are becoming far more important in this space. Different ways of engaging with the study material and things like that, whether it's the ICF or a patient card or something, we're going to have to become a lot more smarter, right? And also listen. And I guess that's what the feedback loop is as well. We need to ask our sites, right? Our investigators that are running the studies, what can we do to help? And when they tell us what they need, we need to listen to them as well, right? That's just my quick points.
Thank you.
Joan, what do you think?
I fully agree. I mean, I think there's so many different technical applications out there today that we didn't have many years ago. You see commercials of an app that you can download. I think it's Babbel when you're traveling international, but there's certain applications that we have access to today that we didn't before. I think hiring bilingual staff members, interpreters. I fully agree with everything that you said, Aman. I think that, and more importantly too, with the sites operationalizing and implementing the plans for the study that they're managing and conducting for the sponsor organization or the CRO, there should be that two-way communication of what do the sites need to be successful and how can we help them be successful to provide them with the tools or the resources that they need, whether it's with the translation services or an application or whatever the case may be, and it even goes beyond that. So I fully agree with you.
Lya, do you want to pick up on that one or move into the Q&A?
I want just to have a point, and because it brings me a bit of anger that we need to have a law in order to start getting things moving, because you would expect that they should be happening already. We live in a global society, right? So that sometimes brings a bit of anger when it comes to this piece, like not looking at the underrepresented population. And there's also something to touch upon is the standard local of care that needs to be taken into account as well, right? Because US is very, very much different from here. Myself, I'm based in Europe, based in London. We have NHS in here, but as far as I hear from my colleagues in the US, if you don't have good insurance, so it's quite difficult if you get a disease or cancer or any of those. But I'll leave to others to comment. I just wanted to express a bit of my anger that we need to have a law to be able to see the needle moving.
Yes, I think we all empathize here in the room, don't we? Thank you, Lya, for that. All right, so I see some questions. Thank you. Thanks for mentioning transportation. Would decentralization help here, and to what extent? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. So transportation, yeah, absolutely. Decentralization can help, right? It's not going to solve everything, right? However, making it easier in terms of the burden that is to families. I'm not going to say just patients. I'm going to talk about families and caregivers as well, because they have that equal kind of, experience, I guess you could say, right? As such. I've seen decentralization can work really well, right? But I've also heard when sometimes they are waiting for home health to kind of start up or something, is on a year-long trial, it's taken 7 months to start something up or something. And that's from a patient. And I'm like, okay, when we say decentralization, what does it truly mean as such as well? If you're talking about most of the, in a protocol, schedule of assessment visits, the things that are low burden, that can be done in home or locally in something, absolutely do them, right? What needs more thinking, and this comes back to, is your protocol optimized, right? Truly optimized as such as well, which is why I guess you could say FDA and other regulatory agencies are saying diversity by design as well, in how to be inclusive, making sure that it's truly inclusive with, if you're having an MRI 1 week and you're going to have it 2 weeks later, why, right? Why can't they be combined as such as well? So decentralization for me, my personal opinion is absolutely it can help move that needle forward, because you're making a trial theoretically more accessible to maybe those patients that may not have had the opportunity to travel into a busy city or something like that, because in the US, for example, look how large the US is, right? It's we in the US and North America, we take airplanes like they're buses, right? More so, right? So that of course would make a difference. Joan, I'm going to stop there because I know you've got some useful insights as well.
So Aman, some great points. And, I think when people think about decentralized clinical trials, there's different definitions around it. And when you look at transportation, I think I was looking at more of, there's organizations out there that provide transportation services to be able to potentially bring a patient to a facility. Now, with decentralized clinical trials, it can go through different elements, whether it's the patient or the caregiver being at home and they're wearing a wearable or sensor collecting that data. Maybe having a mobile unit come to a certain location that's convenient for a patient. So there's various elements of decentralized clinical trials and what those elements may be to bring the trial to the patient, even home healthcare services, or even close to a retail pharmacy. So I think when I looked at transportation, I was thinking more of coordinating with a provider that has those services that would be able to provide the access to the patient to bring them to a location. Decentralized clinical trials based on the study itself may be helpful in that way, bringing that level of technology. Decentralized clinical trials may not be applicable for all studies, but for some, we're just starting to kind of see the footprint and seeing some of the data being captured around that. But I think that's a whole other topic. And Lya, I'm not sure if you'd like to comment, or Aman, just as a follow-up comment.
I think you raised some good points, Joan. You did, like, that whole definition of what is, it's thrown out quite openly, decentralization, but it means strictly some true definitions as well. So thanks for pointing that out.
So here's another one. As CROs, what are some ways to persuade sponsors to truly dedicate resources to these efforts from early stages in all dimensions discussed, rather than as a reactionary strategy?
I guess that's my question first.
I think so.
Okay, so persuading a sponsor company first is about education. There are still, look, not all sponsors are from the US, right? And a lot of sponsors are from other regions and everything. So sometimes it's a case of trying to educate them on, just like how we started this webinar, like level setting, what is required, gray zone currently at the moment. I keep on referring to that. And then what is going to be required, right? But then as a CRO, I've always said, it's our responsibility in the CRO space to help encourage sponsor companies, because that's what sponsor companies are coming to us for. Our expertise, our experience and everything, and it's our job to show how we can do that. And I alluded to that earlier on about, it's not, okay, we're following this recipe, right? Because different community outreach is done in different ways, right? Of course, so guiding them and really trying to understand, okay, where can you spend the money? What do you care about? But ultimately, what are you got? We're going to help you record and report back to the FDA and other regulatory agencies as well. And for that person that asked that question, I would love to have a conversation offline, because I know time is short as well. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn.
We have 2 poll questions in there. Let's see what you all think the most impactful consequence will be, and what the biggest challenge you're facing today is. Let's see what our attendees are saying. We'll look at the answers, and then I'm going to come to each of you for a closing thought. Ladies, takeaways. And I'll drop mine in now while we're waiting for the polls, which is, don't forget the submission window is open. The submission for comments window is open until September 26th. So you can give your opinions to the FDA. That's why we're doing this now. There's still time to influence what's going on. All right, can we pull up the answers? Well, isn't that a lovely, it will improve enrollment is the most impactful consequence that you all think. Isn't that lovely? And what is the biggest challenge you're facing today? So that's fairly evenly spread. Quality data, accessing the social determinants of health, working on the criteria to avoid amendments, and data standardization. Very good. Thank you very much for assisting participants and for being here. So final thoughts. Joan, go ahead. I'll pick on you first.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I think for the diversity action plan, I think it's starting to make significant strides towards a more inclusive clinical trials and healthcare system, as we clearly just saw in the poll around patient diversity. So I think that we're just not enhancing the equity around the the plan that's going to be coming out, but we're going to be ensuring that the treatments are effective and safe for everyone and for our future generations. So that's my closing thought from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Lya.
Thank you. I was just surprised that no one chose that trials would be more expensive. So so that was interesting one, my first thought. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I'm very passionate about diversity. And I just, again, my final ask is encourage you to submit your comments online, have a say, make a difference. We all can make a difference in increasing the awareness of the importance of diversity in clinical trials. And when I mean diversity, that goes beyond race, ethnicity, age, goes to include sex, gender identity, comorbidities, people that have poor backgrounds, people that don't have money to afford like medications, etc. So they all have a kind of a right to have a seat at the table. So thank you so much for listening to me, and please feel free to contact on LinkedIn if you have any other questions that you want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. And Aman?
Quick final thoughts, because I know we're at the top of the hour, gone past that, but thank you so much. I know this is a huge space. Diversity action plans are just one part of the health equity strategies. It is, I guess you could say, it's been a welcome disruptor in industry, because it's making everyone think about how we can move that needle forward, and of course reporting it in. And for me, that encouragement for that guidance, about 10 pages, that means we can't write novels, right? We can't write the dissertations and everything. We can't bury things in, lots of words and figures and tables. We need to be smart and we need to be concise. And that's where, please, wherever you are, for attendees, seek out the expertise and the experience and carry on learning, most importantly, because everyone's learning, and it's always a journey of learning as well, what we can do better. So carry on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We could talk about this for a lot longer, but we must wrap it up now. A big, big thank you to all three of you, Joan, Aman, and Lya, for joining us today and sharing these insights. Also, a big thank you to our audience for attending live, and to those of you who are enjoying the recording later. Well, you missed out, didn't you? We appreciate your input in the survey afterwards, especially on suggestions for future topics in our discussion series. So thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.